All right, so let's talk about the legality and the constitutionality of the postponement of the election by INEC. Does INEC really have the power to postpone this election?
Regrettably, I'm one of those who believe so strongly that INEC does not have the power to postpone general election. Now, Section 25, 1 and 2 is clear on the categories of elections that INEC can tinker with or postpone. I'll give you an example. Section 25, 1 of the Electoral Act talks about certain categories of elections, presidential election, the Senator or National Assembly election, and governorship and House of Representatives. Now, Sub 2 now talks of instances, that's of Section 25, Sub 2, instances when INEC can tinker with election timetable and then fix another day. Now, if you read Section 25.2 in conjunction with Section 26 that enables or empowers INEC to tinker with election timetable, there's no reference. INEC is not constitutionally empowered or statutorily empowered to toy or tinker with the general election, but other election, because you're looking at segmented or what you call regional election in relation to, for instance, council election, chairmanship, and all that. INEC can tinker with the date, but not general election when the election is fixed. Now, under law, there are two categories of persons that can also do this. The president under Section 135, Sub 3, can, because his tenure is for a period certain, 4 years, he could decide to extend his tenure where he discovers, and I won't use the word he could decide to extend his tenure, but if the situation and the circumstance that the country finds itself, if the country is at war, that particular provision says that the president will approach the National Assembly. First, the country must be at war. And for that extension to take place, where his tenure will go beyond 4 years, for instance, there will be tenure elongation for a period not exceeding 6 months. That's what the law says. So there is no provision for what has happened now in relation to INEC's extension for 6 weeks. In relation to presidential, the president will approach the National Assembly. Nigeria is at war. The territory of Nigeria, and the law says, physically at war. He, as the president, is the one that will now decide that in that instance, in that circumstance, election is impracticable, will approach the National Assembly for legislative power. Because we operate constitutional democracy, you have a situation where there are checks and balances. There's no unilateral decision to be taken by any one organ against the other. So the president is expected to approach the National Assembly that in view of what is going on in the nation, this country cannot organize an election. The Constitution also does not recognize an interim administration. There's no provision for interim government. So he continues in office for a period not exceeding 6 months to enable INEC organize the election for that period. If for any reason there will be a further extension, the same process will continue until there is some peace. But if you take it a step further, the reason given for the postponement of the election is because of some disturbances in the northeast. Now, go back in time. I recall that there is a particular decision of the Court of Appeal a while back. I think it's MD Yusuf against Obasanjo, where some of these issues were raised in relation to use of the military in the conduct of elections. The Court of Appeal held in that case that it is unconstitutional to get the military involved in election process. If that is the case, it means you cannot use the military. It means the excuse that the National Security Council or the National Security Advisor or the Chief of Defense Staff advised the chairman of INEC to postpone the election because it did not guarantee, in other words, the security arm did not guarantee the security of lives of persons in that neighborhood where the election will be organized. That in itself is unconstitutional. The court went further, even in berating the chairman of INEC at that time, that if the involvement of the army, right, is his handwork, it means that whatever he embarked on is also in itself unconstitutional. So if you look at all of this, what has played out now is an unconstitutional act as far as we are concerned. If Professor Atahiru Jega, as chairman of INEC, was invited to the Council of State meeting for the purpose of verification, for the purpose of confirmation, for the purpose of explanation, for the purpose of nipping in the bud the initial perception that the election will be postponed on account of the security risk or threats. And he explained to the satisfaction of the Council of State. Mind you, the Council of State is also a constitutional body, and part of its functions is also to advise the president in relation to election matters. And so if the Council of State, in its wisdom, directed the chairman of INEC after satisfactory explanation on the readiness or preparedness of INEC to organize election, has said that go ahead and organize the election, or go ahead and exercise your constitutional powers. Having done so, any other body that advises INEC or otherwise is unconstitutional. And that is my own position. It's what has transpired so far is an unconstitutional act.
But Professor Atari Jega says no court can actually stop the elections from holding on the 28th.
The law says that in the event that a postponement or a pronouncement of postponement is made by INEC, anyone who is aggrieved by such order, by such directive, or by such position has a right to go to court. And upon the filing of the case, there is an order to suspend the effectiveness or the implementation of that pronouncement of INEC. Section 26(5) of the Electoral Act is very clear on that. Perhaps he also needs to seek advice, legal advice from his legal team, perhaps from his legal department, or from legal practitioners, particularly notable legal practitioners across the country. Section 26(5) provides very clearly that where the election timetable has been shifted, any aggrieved party, particularly contestants or parties, have the right to approach the court, and approaching the court will bring about a suspension of that pronouncement made by him to postpone the election. I mean, Section 26(5) is very clear on this. Anyone who is aggrieved has the right to approach the court.
Now, they would say that the 4 northern states are actually at war.
No, you see, the law, the constitution, the way it is drafted, does not envisage, neither does it make reference to segmented war. It says the territory of Nigeria must be at war, physically. So in other words, it is the whole country that must be at war, not a part, not a segment of Nigeria. Now, go further again. If you're referring to internally displaced persons as a ground for not organizing the election, prior to now, have they been given their PVCs? Are they registered voters? Have they registered to participate in the election? Where are these internally displaced persons? These are questions that also beg for answers. You cannot, on the basis of this, now call for postponement of the election. Because I recall that I listened to the chairman of INEC on TV where he said he cannot subject the lives of his ad hoc staff to such crisis. Some of them are youth corpers. What explanation will he give to their parents and all of that? And that he relied. But from his body language and from his conduct, you could tell that he's acting against his own wish, his own position. As far as he's concerned, as the chairman of the electoral body, he's ready to proceed. But it appears that there are supervening circumstances. It appears that, in quote, I might be wrong, but if one is to judge by what one has seen, it's like a body that has been teleguided to doing something that is against its own interest and its own position and its own view. That's the way I see it.
At the press conference, I remember a journalist asked Professor Atari Jega if he was cajoled or forced to make this pronouncement. And he outrightly said no, that he wasn't being cajoled or he wasn't forced. So how can we now say that actually he is not making this decision freely?
Now, for me, it's very clear. You can't approbate and reprobate, as you say in law. If you were summoned to appear before the Council of State, which is the highest body of eminent Nigerians, particularly past leaders and other governors, and a number of other eminently qualified persons who are also in government and holding government office, and you were summoned by the council to explain the preparedness of INEC to organize the election in the face of insurgencies, in the face of threats to lives and property, in the face of what we consider today as security risk. And you were able to explain to the satisfaction of that council that you were ready to organize the election, and the council now gave you a go-ahead to organize the election, why will you turn around again, haven't explained satisfactorily to the council that you were ready to organize the election, and now you now turn around to say you have been advised by security chiefs not to proceed? At the time you appeared before the council and you were able to satisfy the council that you were ready to go, on what basis did you speak to the council? What were the reasons given for the invitation that you appear before the council? Is it not the same as we have now today, that you were summoned to appear and satisfy the council if you were ready to organize the election in the face of security risk? And you said, yes, you were ready to go ahead. So why will you turn around to simply say now that you are not ready, that you have been advised not to go ahead in view of the threat, in view of security risk? Those are the thoughts. But again, I went a step further. Like I said, if we go by the case of Yusuf and Obasanjo earlier, that I referred to earlier, Court of Appeal has said so. You do not involve the military in the conduct of elections. So therefore, if you can't use that as an excuse, it is the responsibility of the police to ensure that there is some order, lives are protected. The police are, by the provisions of Section 217 of the 1999 Constitution, the Army rather, their functions are very clear. The armed forces, very clear. If they must come in civil act, they will be invited to come in civil act. And the court have also gone a step further. It says, if the chairman of INEC invites the military, his conduct is also unconstitutional.
Now, do you think this shift will affect the electorate?
Certainly, there's no doubt about it. And I'll give you a perfect example. And a friend of mine said to me, I was walking in front of his house and I saw a number of cars parked within his premises, and I asked him, when did you buy these cars? He said, no, they're not his, but friends of his who had anticipated what will happen after February 14, after the election, and that they were going abroad, that they were traveling, and will come back until after election. Now, what will happen to such people? When they come back, do you think they're going to participate? And there's so many others. Some businesses have been rescheduled on account of February 14, and then you suddenly now change the election timetable. There might be voter apathy, that I know. There might be voter apathy. Some people might decide not to participate because you never can tell. You might wake up tomorrow morning again to hear that it has been further postponed. Let's look at it this way. Insurgency that has been on for about 6 years. In fact, it has survived the present administration. If it was not resolved within 6 years, can it be resolved within 6 weeks? Can it be resolved within 6 weeks? Are we really serious about this? What will happen if it is not resolved after 6 weeks? Come March 28, if it's not resolved, what then happens? Do we continue? Would we ask for a further extension? Whether we like it or not, we must have the election. If, despite the imperfections, same thing like I said about our laws, despite our imperfection, we must work at it to ensure that we come about with that. As we trot along, as we walk along, if there's a need to amend, we amend accordingly. Same thing with the election. It won't be perfect. It's not possible to have a perfectly organized election. But for otherwise, go ahead and organize the election the way it is and ensure that some areas where you consider to be flashpoints or red alert areas, ensure that there's some measure of security there.
And that will do it for us today on the program. Thank you so much for being a part of it. You can please send your comments to the address on your screen. I'm Victoria Ido. See you next week.